No, we're not going to have prayer. Okay, let's go ahead and get started, guys. Thank you for being on time. Um, Today the agenda is pretty straightforward. What I've done is I've added a public presentation at the beginning of the meeting. Since we only have two people, we'll do 2 minutes to give people an opportunity to kind of share with us what their thoughts are, and had a chance to digest the last meeting. And so I think it's important that we, rather than wait till the end, it would be good to hear some of the thoughts people had at the beginning, as we look at the various voting methods, the pros and cons of the voting methods, and then going down the agenda. We'll look at districting as well if we get to it. And so Rania is going to do a presentation on various voting methods. And so she'll lead the conversation through item 4. I also handed out from Mary. She actually put down some of her thoughts regarding districting and regarding election methods. So I've handed that out to everybody, and if anybody from the public wants one, we have it here. Okay. I'm assuming, yeah, there we go. Okay. So that's our schedule. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to make a motion to excuse Beverly and Mary, as they both are going to be out of town for this meeting. Can I get a second?
I'll make that motion, and then do a second.
Okay.
I don't know if you can make motions, but.
Yeah, well, it's a formality. Okay, so I made the motion, Hassam seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks. I don't know about Teresa, and I don't know about... where's Teresa? Oh, you're Teresa. I was asking, I'm all, Teresa, I can't picture Teresa, and you've been sitting next to me the whole... Sorry. So I don't know about Chris Horton. I haven't heard from Chris. So he may or may not show up. Okay, let's move to public presentation. If there's anybody in the public that wants to make a 2-minute presentation, wants to give us your thoughts on this process, anything that we've talked about, anything that's been presented, I want to give you a chance to let the committee know kind of what your thoughts are as we start to look at the various election or the districting process and choosing an election system. So is there anybody from the public that wants to? Okay. If you could stand where we could all see you, that would be great. The camera might get the back of your head, but if you're not running for council, you don't need airtime. So there you go. Good. Okay. You need a mic.
My name is David Kaplicek, and
It's not.
the mic. Oh, the left button, hold it down.
My name is Dave Kadlacek, and before I begin saying substantive stuff, I'm going to apologize for coming to your meeting and then leaving after about half an hour because I have something else I have to be at 7:45. The main thing I wanted to say is that in looking at how to elect council members, you should look at the criteria before just discussing solutions. I mean, it's all well and good to look at the various possible solutions and the pluses and minuses of them, but when you're deciding on what to do, you should think about the criteria to use in picking a solution before you do that. And I would suggest that at least 3 of the criteria to use is to get an election method that represents all Santa Clarans, not just a majority of Santa Clarans. So that everyone's represented on the council. A second is something that could resolve the current CVRA lawsuit. And third is something that could prevent any future CVRA lawsuits, which could happen even if this one was settled. And as for possible solutions, I think that the obvious thing for getting all Santa Clarans to be represented is to use a proportional proportional or semi-proportional election method rather than a simple plurality or majoritarian method. Which one of those to use that is possible is something that needs to be figured out based on what the county can support and such considerations. Other things to consider besides the way in which voting takes place are the frequency of elections and the number of council members that may or may, that wasn't explicitly given in your charge, but all of those affect how well the council represents Santa Clarans, and you should look at those as part of the solution, maybe deciding to just stay with what you have or maybe not. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, let's move on to the approval of minutes. Everybody had a chance to look at the minutes. Who was here? Okay.
I had a comment about, on page 2, 3B, preliminary direction. It says, committee members could not provide direction in favor of by-district voting at this time. And I just wanted to caution the person who's writing this that seems pretty biased, because there's lots of directions that we couldn't decide on taking, not just by-district voting. So we also didn't decide on any of the other ways either. So we may end up going district voting, we may not. And so I would just caution that we don't want to bias it in one particular way. Does that make sense?
Can you say that again? I didn't understand your comment.
So when we got to that section of preliminary direction at the meeting, we decided we didn't have enough information to do a preliminary direction. But the note that's in the minute says we couldn't provide direction in favor of by-district voting. Well, we didn't have direction for anything, period. So I didn't want to think that we were only considering by-district voting, because we're considering others as well.
Okay.
So I would just, maybe that's the way of saying it is, it should say report provided, committee members could not provide direction at this time.
Okay.
I would just say I had the same note, which is I think we just didn't provide any direction. It wasn't that we didn't provide direction on district election.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion? Mic on.
I think it's on now.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay, so what I would suggest is perhaps someone make a motion to amend the minutes to simply read committee, what would we say? Committee members did not provide direction, period.
So moved.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Great. Okay, so can we get a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Is there a second? Marcus? All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous.
Do you know, I think I have to abstain because I wasn't at the last meeting.
Okay, and one abstention. Thank you. Okay, so let's move into a presentation by Rania. Did everybody get the handout? You should have received a handout. Yep. Blue. I think I gave mine away. Or I put it in my binder. I think I gave it away. Okay. Does anybody from the public? Do you all have? You got it? Okay. Cool. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Rania, and she'll go through some of these election systems. Also note that these are not the only election systems, right? There's a number of other ones that we also may consider, but I think this is a very good start on some of the more, I would probably argue, some of the more common ones that we'll look at. And then, of course, if there's any others that we would like to discuss, or if there's any others that we want to put on the agenda for when the individual from the county comes and talks to us, we can kind of have like a parking lot where we put different types of systems that we've heard of that we want to have explained, okay? So we can also do that. Okay, I'll pass it over to Ronnie.
I got it. Okay, good evening. Thank you, Chair, for that introduction. And just as the Chair noted, this is an introduction to an overview of election systems and voting methods based on the California Municipal Democracy Index that was provided to you at the last agenda, or at the last meeting, and also available on our website as well under handbook documents. So based on feedback from the committee members, there was a request to see pros and cons of the various election systems and voting methods that were discussed. And so this document here is divided. Page 1 reviews the 4 election systems, and page 2 through 4 reviews the voting methods, various voting methods. And as you are aware that these can be mixed and kind of are meant to work together. So I would like to begin by reviewing by district voting method. The committee did do a pros and cons analysis of the system at the last meeting, and basically, it is the by-district election system is likely to lead to a council that is more representational of the electorate and to provide representation to minority groupings.
I'll leave that up to the speaker.
Okay. What questions? Sure. What questions do you have?
Well, I wanted some clarification, I guess, on what you just said, because in a city such as ours that does not have areas of the city with a strong minority base, we don't have an Indian section necessarily, or different subgroups. I'm trying to figure out, if you district, why would that necessarily give you a better chance of being represented on the city council, especially minority groups, that section there? If you have only 20% minority in that area, in each of the areas, then how does that help us get a minority person onto the council?
So this information, like I said, is based on the Municipal Democracy Index, and it is also the California Voting Rights Act does also state that by district voting is what would help provide more minority representation on the council. Now I understand that Santa Clara, based on the demography report, is a little different, and that minorities are not kind of in one area, to your point. However, do keep in mind that districts don't have to be just based on minority groupings. It could also be based on community interest, on geography, and so forth. So, like I said, this is based on research, and I know that, like you said, Santa Clara is a little bit different, which is why the council, has, kind of directed this charter to take a look at this.
I'm just not convinced that just going by district is going to be enough for what we want to do.
Yeah.
I'll share that there are, one of the reasons is what you just mentioned with regards to one of the reasons that the California Common Cause in doing their Democracy Index felt that this was the case was based on really broad research. If you can look at that nationally and in fact across the state, in many communities there are significant pockets of concentrated folks who are from emerging minority communities. The other, though, was with regards to income and the ability to run a campaign, in that in many communities, folks from emerging minority communities are not as affluent as folks who traditionally run in citywide elections. So if they can run from in a smaller geographical area, they're more able to fundraise among
a smaller voter base, even if it's outside of the district, citywide, that will allow them to concentrate those resources in a smaller area and therefore be able to run competitive campaigns. You would need to consider whether or not you think that that wealth disparity is the case in Santa Clara, and a demographer could probably tell us that better.
And that's the point about the by district that I really think would help Santa Clara, because I don't think it's that we could find a district that has a single minority group, but just because you're campaigning amongst a smaller group of people, you'd have a better chance of being able to talk to people and reaching out to the people in your area. And when you can tell your story in that way, one-on-one, or with small groups, that people are more likely to understand your your background, and even if you're a minority, people can still relate to you, even though you are a different background than the voter. So to me, that is what it buys us, and not just the fact that it's a smaller area.
I just wanted to make an observation, and that's that this is a very general report based upon something published by somebody else. So we're just going through the pros and cons that are written in the report. I think we're not. Right. And so I think probably the most useful way of spending our time would be to just kind of go through everything, and then once we understand what the different methods are, then maybe perhaps try to apply. Do you think? Let's go through these again, maybe applying it to Santa Clara. Like, what do you think in terms of Santa Clara? Do you think these are the same pros and cons? Do you think they're different ones? We didn't want to, in our report, we didn't want to try to do that for you. We just wanted to present what was in the paper. Okay? Great.
Yes, so as Brian mentioned, this is based on the Democracy Index, and so even the analysis that the committee had done 2 weeks ago, all those points are not mentioned here. This is based on the research. Since we did review this already, I just did want to point out that there are also cons to by district, as mentioned, and that it can create more intra-city council conflict. Committee members did speak about the mayor effect, and that the seats will only be accessible every 4 years to the district, as opposed to having citywide elections and seats available every 2 years due to staggered terms. So it's also important to note that to address these cons, there was a suggestion to consider multi-member districts, which the interim city attorney will address later, on the agenda if we get to it. But and it is not included in this document. But I did just want to note that is obviously an option to consider, and also wanted to note that the by-district election system tends to be used by large cities. However, the number of cities using by-district is growing due to civil rights litigations, such as the one that the city of Santa Clara is in right now. And by 2018, about a total of 75 cities will be using this system. Cities with by-district are more likely to adopt a majority winner voting method. Santa Clara uses the plurality winner voting method. And about 19 by-district cities either use the two-round runoff or instant runoff ranked choice voting. So I just wanted to point to the handout, the blue chart that kind of that shows the 4 different election method systems that we're going through right now. So I will jump to the at-large systems, and there's about 3. There's 3 categories to the at-large, and as you know, it is candidates run citywide and at-large election system and are elected by the citywide electorate. Each voter may cast a number of votes equal to the number of seats up for election. This tends to lead to better qualified candidates because it is a larger pool of candidates, and also leads to focusing on the community as a whole versus a single district. However, as you may know, one of the cons to this is that it may lead to certain areas, especially low income and minority areas, being unrepresented and politically neglected. So most cities in the state of California actually do utilize this form of election system. There are 415 cities that use this, and it's popular among small and mid-sized cities. And however, due to civil rights violations, several cities are transitioning away from the at-large election system. Now, also included in the at-large is at-large from district. And basically, this is when candidates run to represent and actually must reside in that district. But they are elected citywide, so voters can cast one vote per district. It does tend to provide a broader geographic representation on the city council while ensuring that council members are accountable to the electorate as a whole. However, just as mentioned before, it can enable a majority of electorate to win every available seat and thus shutting out minority representation. There are 8 cities in the state of California that use this form of at-large election system, at-large from district. And then the at-large by seat, as you know, is the one that Santa Clara uses. Candidates may run for any seat up for election, and the seats do not represent a geographic area, but voters can cast one vote per seat. Some of the advantages of this is that it does promote greater political accountability, and it does allow voters to vote citywide for all the seats as well. It can, however, enable a majority of the electorate to win every available seat and thus shutting out minority representation as well. And as noted before, there are 2 charter cities in the state of California that use this system, and that is Santa Clara and Sunnyvale. Chula Vista and Modesto used to use this system as well, but they have recently transitioned to the by-district election. So regarding voting methods, it's divided here. The various voting methods are divided according, I first summarized the majority win voting methods, and then plurality and the single transferable vote. So as you know, majority win means that a winning candidate must receive over 50% of the vote. In California, about 20 cities use the majority win voting method. Some of those include San Jose in our county, Los Angeles, San Diego, and so forth. So the majority, the methods that fall under the majority win category include the 2-round runoff, the top 2 runoff, and ranked choice voting, or also known as instant runoff.
What was that again, the 3?
2-round runoff, top 2 runoff, and ranked choice voting. It is also known as instant runoff voting. Yeah.
So I was just going to give you examples of each of those. The 2-round runoff is similar to what happens with the San Jose City Council. They have their initial election in June. If someone wins 50% of the vote, then outright they just win the election in June. Then they have to wait until December to actually take their seat. If nobody gets a majority, then the top 2 run again in November. So there's only 2, and then you have a winner in November. The second type is the top 2 runoff system, and that, if you recall, is what California has now for its statewide elections, and I think for Congress as well, where even if you got a majority, you still have 2 people running because it's the top 2. It's an open primary system. So when you have an open primary system, it's the top 2. And even if you won 50% outright at that time, you'd still run against the second leading candidate in November. And then the third one, you'd only have one election, but you'd have your instant runoff. The votes would be tallied in a way where you'd get the instant runoff right in that same election.
So regarding the two-round runoff, about 16 cities use this in the state of California. And I mentioned San Jose, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Stockton, and Burbank. It is primarily adopted by charter cities with by-district election. General law cities cannot use this system. And in fact, state law requires general law cities to use plurality voting methods, just like the method that Santa Clara uses. Some of the pros of the two-round runoff, is that it does promote majority support and provides a second election for the majority to evaluate and vote on a representative of the two remaining candidates. However, some of the cons is that it is a little bit more expensive for cities to have two elections, and there is there can be some variability of voter turnout between the two elections in the runoff. And basically, usually in a November election, you'll have an increased voter turnout than in the primary election. The top two runoff, that Brian just mentioned, does not requires the second runoff, and it does address the downside of the first one, in that it does make it mandatory to have a November election, and thus whoever is selected is not affected by the voter discrepancy. San Diego is one of the cities that will actually transition to this system in 2018 because they want to ensure that the November voter turnout, finalizes the candidate. Now, regarding the instant runoff voting, would you like me to go through the steps of how it works? I know that, interim city attorney did discuss. Okay. So basically, in the instant runoff voting, voters rank the candidates on their ballot in order of preference, and if no candidate has a majority of first choice votes, then there's a process of elimination and transferring of votes. The candidate who receives the fewest votes is basically eliminated, and then the voters who selected that eliminated candidate as a first choice, they'll have those votes be redistributed proportionally to the voter's second choice. The votes are then recounted to see if any candidate now has a majority. And if not, this process repeats, eliminating the lowest scoring candidate sequentially and redistributing the votes across candidates until a candidate receives a majority of the votes and is elected. This form of voting gets its name since voters' preferences are known in advance, and there's no need for a second runoff. It is an instant runoff without a second election. The pros of this method is that it does benefit that there is no second election needed, and so no turnout discrepancies that accompany the runoffs. And also, it does reduce campaign fundraising cycles as well, since it's just one election. The cons, as you may have noticed, that it could be confusing for voters to understand how it works, and understanding, choosing a candidate versus ranking your candidates. It also may be expensive and time-consuming to count ballots, and voter education would be needed to implement. And voters also need to be more informed about their candidates as well. In addition, whether or not it's feasible in Santa Clara County is unknown at this time. Currently in the Bay Area, 4 cities use this form of voting: Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, and San Leandro. However, it's important to note that they allow ranking for 3 candidates only, and it's not the true instant rank voting, the true form in where you can rank all the candidates They are only allowed to rank 3 candidates. And again, this method is only available to charter cities as well. 32% of our cities use by district. They use use either the 2-round runoff or the instant runoff voting. Sorry.
Excuse me. May I ask could you elaborate on can prevent or stifle debates between all candidates? Because I don't think I understood what you meant.
I'm sorry.
by that
Can
as
you
a-
repeat that question?
Your con number 4 is can prevent or stifle debates between all candidates and lead to focus on debate with front runner only. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah,
In
so-
particular, that with respect to instant runoff voting compared to.
So, so basically, what could happen is that if a front runner is identified, there could be much debate between there could be much debate focused on just between the front runner and not between the other candidates.
Right, but why isn't that true just as much for a majority an election where someone has to get a majority? I mean, I guess I didn't see what that had to do with instant runoff voting in particular.
Keith, part of it is the dynamic where the candidates who are not the front runners, and if there is an identified front runner, say you're running for, mayor against an incumbent mayor or against an incumbent council member or somebody like that, where you or there simply is a candidate that has just shown themselves to be very strong with regards to name ID, fundraising, and all the rest of that. If Steve Lodge is the front runner, and there are another 4 or 5 of us here who are running, realizing that Steve is going to make it into the final round of voting, then we're never competing for his 2nd, 3rd, or 4th tier votes. That's right. Or we're competing for each other's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tier votes. Therefore, I'll never debate Keith Sattenfield in a manner that's aggressive, because I don't want folks who are your 2nd or 3rd or 4th votes to be turned off by the fact that you and I are debating each other. In fact, I'm going to do everything that I can to be as positive as I can be about everyone except for Steve, because Steve's the front runner, and I know I'm never going to have a chance to get his votes. So while mathematically it may have the function of being somewhat of an instant runoff, or although even that isn't, it doesn't truly get you to a majority of the initial votes cast. The debate that occurs is permeated in that it doesn't behoove me politically to actually engage anybody except for the front runner, which is nice if you want to debate between the front runner and all the other candidates, but it's not as robust as if we weren't worried about playing for 2nd or 3rd or 4th. And you've seen candidates in fact, I think one of the mayoral candidates in Oakland had said, don't make me your first vote. I'm happy to be your 2nd vote or your 3rd vote. Just put me on your list. And she ended up winning mayor. So there are aberrations like that can happen just due to the political nature of how the debate occurs.
I'd actually look at it a little differently, and I'd probably put an item in the pros list for whether it's instant runoff or any system that uses a plurality, that it stifles negative debate, because nobody ever wants to be the jerk. Because then, even if they're not number 1, if you're the jerk candidate to other candidates, then you won't be number 2, 3, 4, or 5. You'll turn voters off. So I actually see that as a pro, because when you're being ranked amongst your peers, you try to keep your message positive rather than negative, so you wouldn't turn off people who weren't even considering you for number 1 anyways, but who might have considered you for 2 or 3, and so you stay positive. So campaigns would be a lot more positive and a lot less toxic. I think that's a very strong pro.
That actually is the case for all the other candidates except for the debate with the front runner, in which case they still have the ability to be critical.
If they're the front runner, they could take the heat.
That's a point of view.
Yeah.
But there's another case to that. There's a third case, all right, and that is that the lower ones on the ranking can manipulate it too, so that they work together to avoid, they can actually form so say there's 5 people and there is a front runner, the 4 others can work it out so that one of those can actually beat the front runner. There is a way to do that, and it has happened. I've seen that many times in Australia.
Isn't that empowering, though? Minorities, right? I mean, I think that's, yeah.
I'm just pointing out that it is possible to do.
Well, I mean, in a sense, if there are 5 candidates and 4 of them agree that none of them are going to be candidate number 1, and all of them think that one of the 4 of them should be number 2, the remaining 3 can just quit. And then in any election, you're going to end up with the remaining 2 candidates being the remaining 2 candidates.
I don't think your mic's on, by the way.
I think it is.
Talk into it.
I'm just not talking well.
Okay, to continue, the other method of voting is plurality. As mentioned before, this is the method that Santa Clara uses, and basically means that the winning candidate receives the most. The winning candidate that receives the most votes is elected, and the majority of votes is not required to win. As we know, this is easy to understand and administer, and like I mentioned, majority of the cities in California currently use this system. 96% of all cities use this method, and that is because the state law requires that general law cities use plurality voting. Also, a pro to this is that it can be scheduled at the same time as the state general election, and when turnout is highest, since it only requires 1 election. However, some of the cons to this is that vote splitting can occur, and basically it can result in winners who have little popular support, and also known as the spoiler effect as well. An example of this is if you were to have 4 candidates, 3 of them are, let's say, no growth candidates, and 1 is pro-growth. Basically the 3 no growth candidates could split that vote, and you have more votes going to that 1 candidate who represents no growth. So one of the methods that's also used, considered plurality voting, is cumulative voting. And this is basically traditional at-large voting in which candidates run at large. Voters are allocated a number of votes equal to the number of seats to be filled, and the winner is determined by a plurality vote. However, a voter is not required to cast all of their votes to a separate candidate, and they have the option of allocating all their votes to the same candidate. This method, proponents say that it empowers the minority communities in at-large voting systems and results in better representation for political and racial minorities, and better representation for ethnic minorities than by district elections. The cons to this is that, 1, we don't know if it's feasible in Santa Clara County, and 2, it tends to incentivize strategic voting and remains also vulnerable to the spoiler effect as well, and can lead to inconsistent results. This form of voting is not used in the state of California. Several cities in California have considered this method to settle or address California Voting Rights Act litigation or lawsuits. And in fact, in 2015, Santa Clarita reached a settlement agreement with the CVRA plaintiff to adopt cumulative voting. However, because it was a general law city, the courts ruled that that city was not authorized to implement such a voting system. And then the last method I wanted to include, or is included, is the single transferable vote, also known as choice voting. And basically, this is the multi-seat version of the instant runoff voting. Voters, basically, they rank their candidates, again, according to preference, and they are elected at large, but unlike the traditional at large, they must receive a certain threshold of voter support to be elected. and it's based on the percent of voters and the number of seats that are being filled. And it's similar to the other method that was discussed. I can go through the steps here briefly. Basically, a candidate who reaches the voter threshold from the first choice voters is elected, and then any excess votes over that threshold are then proportionally counted for the voter's second choice, or are distributed to the second choice winners. And after excess votes are counted, that candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. The voters who selected the defeated candidates as a first choice will then have their votes counted to their second choice, and this process continues. The cons to this is that it is a bit confusing, and can enable fringe candidates to win. Also, we do not know if this is feasible in Santa Clara County. It has not been supported in the past. This method of voting is also known as proportional representation. However, proponents say that it does effectively elect a legislative body that matches the diverse preferences of the electorate as a whole, and more likely to result in representation for minority voting blocks.
I have a question. Do any of the methods you talked about not have voter dilution built into it?
Voter
We've gone
dilution?
through at-large and runoff. Both of those have voter dilution built into it. What is voter dilution? That's
Dilution.
voter dilution basically is when the majority vote overwhelms the minority vote. And in all of the at-large methods, that happens. And when you have a runoff and a minority candidate against a majority candidate, that runoff gives the majority a chance to regroup, and when they come back for the second vote, they overwhelm the minority.
That's possible, except except with Santa Clara, it does not appear, we haven't really been able to figure out from looking at the way people have actually voted. I did take a look at the voting results from the last election, and if you look at, for example, minority candidates came in second in two of the council races, but they weren't very far behind the first candidate. So, and both of the number one candidates had name recognition. They were incumbent candidates. So you could look at it several ways. You could say,
But if you look at the results of the December 2016 election, four seats.
November?
There were 137,000 votes.
right,
cast. 84,000 votes went to non-Hispanic white candidates.
but how do you know that they were voted along ethnic lines? How do you know that?
I'm just using those numbers.
Right.
I mean, I went through and looked at the results and didn't pay attention to who was going against who. I divided them into categories: non-Hispanic, white, Asian American, Hispanic, or Latino. The white candidates received 84,000 votes. The Asian candidates received 36,000 votes, and the Hispanic received 16,000 votes.
Oh, I see.
Right, but what I'm saying is this: you don't know that if you had only two candidates, you don't know that the second candidate might have gotten a majority if there were only two candidates running, because the second candidate was, you could assume that, there's no real way of knowing. I mean, like if you said, well, you could look at the first candidate and say, well, a majority of people voted against the first candidate. They split the vote among the two minority candidates running against that candidate. And we don't know who those people were that voted for the minority or
Right,
majority
you don't
candidates.
know
You don't
how
know.
the vote was divided up.
Right, you don't know what the ethnic composition of the voters were or what the reasoning. The lawsuit that was filed against Santa Clara assumes all Asians vote for Asians.
But my point is 84,000 votes for one group of candidates compared to 36 and 16,000. Somebody's going to get overwhelmed. in that kind of
It's
number
possible,
picture.
but we just don't know. We
But
just don't know.
Rex, I don't think you could add it up like that because in some seats, there were two candidates in one seat, there were 3 candidates in another seat, 4 candidates in another seat, and 5 candidates in another seat. So you can't really add up the votes like that because when you have a seat that only has 2 people running, then they're going to take, out of the 35,000 votes, each one will take half, right? Whereas in the race where there's 5 candidates running, out of the 35,000 votes, each person will only take 1/7. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison when you just add up all the votes when the seats have different numbers of people running in each one.
My point is, basically, as a group, we have to look at vote dilution. I mean, we have to look at the voting methods which kind of neutralize or remove that.
I don't think you're ever going to find. I mean, I've been looking at this stuff for as long as everybody else, and every single method we make assumptions. We make assumptions that whites are going to vote for whites, and Hispanics are going to vote for Hispanics, and Asians are going to vote for Asians, and that's just not the way it is. It's just not the way it works here. It's not the way it works in Santa Clara. I mean, if you look at, take the different. I mean, when you have an at-large, and speaking of, the big concern is that all the council's white. If you look at the demographics in Santa Clara, it's not majority white. In fact, I would argue probably now, white is probably a minority. And so we make this assumption that, well, if we do all these things, then we're going to get a minority candidate elected. But yet, the white population is not the majority population, and yet, based on your numbers, they took the majority of the votes. So
The white population has a greater number of registered voters than the minority groups.
right?
Like with the East Indians represent 14% of the population, but they only have 3% to registered voters.
Right.
And probably all the other
And so
categories
the way that I
have
look at
similar
it, though,
numbers.
is that if, and I feel strongly about this, if the Hispanic population wants to get a Hispanic person voted, and it's that important, then those folks should register. And those folks should get out and vote. Because to say that, well, the white guy always wins because there's more white registered voters, well, who is stopping those that are eligible to vote from registering? Who's stopping the Asian community,
primarily.
or the Indian community, or the Hispanic community? Who's stopping them from going and registering? Who's stopping them from supporting Marcus, right? I mean, Marcus ran. I ran against Marcus, and I was proud to run against Marcus. But for me, it feels like, well, we have to find a way to undermine so that a white person doesn't get elected. And that's kind of how it sort of feels when we're going through this, which is, well, gee, it's not right that the white candidate had so many votes. Because I fundamentally feel that if the Hispanic population, which I think would be great, if they really wanted to have representation on the council, then you have to come out and you have to register and you have to vote. That, for me,
I agree
and
with
I don't
that.
know that any method we look at is going to fix that. Because we make so many assumptions that Asians will vote for Asians. Well, even in the Indian community, there's a lot of different sects within the Indian community.
But with a lot of the new immigrant kinds of categories, that's going to be multiple generations before what you're suggesting happens.
Right. But that's true. And why is that wrong?
It's
I
not,
don't understand why. To me, I still don't understand why it's wrong. I don't understand why, if you have 4 different ethnicities, that we have to get someone other than white rather than having the best person who's qualified.
Well, basically, the wrong part of it goes to the constitutional principle of one person, one vote.
Sorry.
And when
I can't.
a minority who is a voter, where his vote doesn't count as much as somebody else's, then that part is wrong.
Okay. Well, let's, I know there's other folks that want to speak. Let me go, I know Keith and then Jody and then Hassam.
And I understand what you're saying. I'm concerned about having a government that is most representative of the people. So I'm not hugely concerned about ethnicities, but I think we have a city where there are a lot of different viewpoints. We have pro-growth people, we have anti-growth people. We have pro-stadium people, we have anti-stadium people. We have the road should be better. We have the road should be worse. There should be more mass transit people. And I think we want to get a system that elects people from all of those different groups. And what we have right now is if 60% of our city is anti-growth and 40% is pro-growth, we have a 100% anti-growth city council. Because in each seat, the anti-growth candidate would get 60% of the vote and the pro-growth, right? And then you have city council meetings that go on for 2 years and nothing at all happens because there's no one there that expresses the viewpoint of 40% of the city.
That's right.
And I mean, some of these methods to me would be more likely. Single transferable vote would say, you know, if there was a issue that the city agreed was most important, and if it was a 60-40 divide in the city, then roughly 60% of those elected should be anti-growth and 40% should be pro-growth. And then they can talk for the next 2 years at city council meetings, and they can compromise, and we can make progress. Whereas what we got right now is whatever side gets elected is going to race to do as much as they can in the time they're there because something different's going to happen. And they don't need to compromise because there's no one to compromise with. They're all on, in some sense, the same side. So, I mean, that's what's important to me. I don't know about the rest of you. But I think there are systems we could adopt that would be more likely to get a city council that a little more accurately reflects the diversity we have. And as a consequence, hopefully that would resolve the lawsuit situation, which is
Not if you're focusing on
issues.
political diversity.
Well,
The task of this committee is to look at, I just want to bring us back to why we're here. We're not here to get a more politically representative government. We're here to try to remove impediments that we might find within our current voting system to minorities being able to be elected. So, you know, if...
So that's, I don't think anything I said would have made it any worse.
Well, we're not trying to not make it worse. We're trying to make it better. And so we need to really focus on the issue of are there impediments in the system that we have now that might not be there if we chose a different system. I've already said, you know, whether we like it or not, we are much less likely to get sued if we go to a district election system. Now, so that's one of your points, is to look at that and say, you know, because that is one distinct advantage of going to a district system is that we are much less likely to get sued, regardless of the outcome of it. Once you decide whether or not you want to do that, then you can talk about whatever system we choose, whether it's, that's why we broke it down this way. So you have the district systems and then you have voting methods. So I think we should maybe focus on the system first, and then you can discuss the voting methods within it. But to try to do it all at once, I think is very difficult in terms of you making a decision as a committee. It's a very big committee with a lot of different viewpoints. And
I concur. Some of these voting systems don't work with district elections.
I think all of them would work in a district election.
Well, you can't do proportional representation in a district election because you elect one person.
We can't do proportional representation in Santa Clara. I mean,
Well, then,
that's for a parliamentary system. That's for like a country or a state. It's not for a little
And
city.
I kind of agree, but you just finished presenting it as something for us to think about.
Well,
so.
we just did it just to be thorough, so no one would say we didn't present it to you, but I think the last two are ones that we don't even know whether we can do in Santa Clara County. They would be introducing something that no one has seen before in California. We're not recommending them. We're just presenting them to let you know about them. Personally, if you asked me, I'd say I couldn't even explain them really very well. So if I as the city attorney couldn't even explain it very well, I certainly wouldn't want to present a voter with that methodology. But you're free to discuss it and you're free to recommend it.
So
But
let's go forward. So because there's a lot of folks that want to participate. So we'll go to Jody and we'll go to Saskia
No, it was Hossam.
or Hossam,
Okay.
Saskia and Teresa.
Okay, so first, I want to comment on what Tino said, because I think that there is so much value in having, I just wanted to wait for him to hear it.
I'm listening.
Okay. I think that there is so much value in having diversity on the council, even if it's not exactly representative of the population or the voters. If there's only 20% of some minority and there ended up being 10% or 30% on the council, I think there's value in hearing that voice, because having different voices, just like you said, pro-growth, anti-growth, or transit versus driving, a woman's voice versus a man's voice is very different. And you want to make sure that even if both the man and the woman are white, that you have both of those voices. So I think diversity is important. So even if you have a group that is a much smaller percentage, having that voice is of value because it just brings a different discussion. Now, in terms of the election systems, I think that there are, when you look at running for a position and you're doing it at large, it is really hard because there are so many people. You cannot get, you can't contact everyone, you can't knock on every door as a candidate. It's very expensive to send out mailers, and when you have an at-large, it can make it prohibitively expensive. So I can really see the benefit from those terms of a district system. However, the part that I don't like of just a single person in a district is that then you get the feeling like they're just advocating for the people in their district. So I want to make sure that the park that gets built is the one gets built in my district, or the and not, yeah, exactly. And then you get it seems like you would get a lot of issues with, hey, I'll give you that park, but you have to give me the fire station, or, oh, you know, I've got a group of people that are really pushing me to do something, and I don't really like that. So the idea of having more than one person from each district seemed really appealing, because then you'd have multiple people that you could talk to. So if you had one person in your district who was really pro-growth and you were anti-growth, well, then you're kind of lost. But if you had two people, then maybe one of them might be interested in hearing your opinion. So the idea of having 3 districts of 2, like, in fact, what Mary wrote, I thought was really compelling. And then you have people in your district getting elected every 2 years instead of having to wait every 4 years. So you have a better chance of getting really good candidates because you've got more chances to vote on people from your district. You know, one person doesn't only have one option of running every 4 years, they could run every 2 years and have a better chance of getting on. So you have a better chance of getting really good people on. And you have a better chances as a member of that district to be able to find somebody that you have common ground with.
Thank you. And I will go on record in saying that I'm not against diversity, because I know that's kind of how you made it sound, and that's not what I'm saying.
Sorry, that's what I was hearing, so that's good clarification, thank you.
Hassam?
Okay, I have a few comments. First one is to comment on kind of the debate that was happening between Tino and Rex. And I kind of want to echo, I think our city attorney mentioned this, which is, and let me kind of rephrase what I heard. You want to ensure that there's more, ethnic diversity. Tino is saying if different ethnicities want a candidate, let them run their candidate. I actually say, I don't care who wins, as long as, and this is where the CVRA comes into play, as long as no ethnic minority is disenfranchised by the voting system.
Mm-hmm.
That's what matters. Now, if it's an equal, it's a level playing field for everybody, whoever wins, wins. Even if it's all white people, again, it doesn't matter. But it's a level playing field. And I think that's what we as a committee have to look at, picking a election method that levels the playing field for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our job. I don't care who wins after the field, the playing field is leveled. That's my first comment. The second one is a little bit of a technicality, but I think it's important given what our city attorney just said, and I don't necessarily agree with him, but again, we can debate that. And that is, in the way that this report is presented, instant runoff voting is lumped in the majority category and not in the plurality category. And the distinction that Rania made between the two categories is that in a majority category, the winning candidate will always get 50% plus one. That's not actually true in an instant runoff voting, because let's say you have 5 candidates running and you need to rank the candidates, but let's say somebody doesn't rank all 5. Let's say somebody only ranks their top 2. And not just one person, but let's say a bunch of people only rank their top 2 because they don't know anything about candidates 3, 4, and 5. So you may end up with a candidate who wins who doesn't get 50% of the vote because a lot of people didn't vote for all 5 candidates. So after your first 2 candidates drop out, your vote is essentially useless at that point because it doesn't go to your third choice. So instant runoff is not a majority system, it's still a plurality system. And then the reason that's important to me, it seems like a technicality, but the reason that's important to me is because the difference between instant runoff voting and single transferable vote is a very minor difference that has a very minor difference in terms of the procedure of how it's counted, not in how it's cast. It's exactly the same in terms of how somebody fills out their ballot. But in terms of how it's counted, it makes a distinction that says, if, let's say all of us in this, let's say there's 2 seats open or 3 seats open, and all of us in this room really love Steve Lodge, and we all put him as number 1, okay? But Steve Lodge only needed 50% of the vote to win. Or actually, he only needed 33% plus 1 to win, because there's 2 seats open. So he got 100% of the vote. 67% of the vote was wasted because he didn't need more than 33%. So what single transferable vote does is that if somebody reaches the threshold, that's why they're using the word threshold, if somebody reaches 33% plus 1 in that scenario, then all the other votes that get cast for him as number 1, those then get down to the number 2. So no vote is wasted. No vote. The other analogy you think about is that if you look at the way presidential elections happen in our country right now, is that if you don't vote for Democratic or Republican, you say, well, my vote's going to be wasted, right? Well, the reality is your vote is wasted in this, let's say in the last cycle. If you voted Democrat, your vote was wasted anyways because your winner didn't win. So the idea, it's a very negative way of looking at voting. The idea with instant runoff or single transferable vote is that no vote is wasted because if your number 1 person doesn't get enough votes to be elected, your ballot doesn't get thrown in the trash. It goes to your number 2, and so on and so forth. And again, the distinction between instant runoff, which we all kind of understand, and single transferable vote is that in instant runoff, if somebody's super popular, your vote can still be wasted because they got more votes than they needed to win. In single transferable vote is that even your ballot for a really popular candidate still did not get wasted. And that's the minor distinction. And that happens in accounting, not in the casting. And then I'm talking a lot here, so I'm almost done. There was in here, in a few of these systems, listed in the cons column was that it says it can enable fringe candidates to win, and I actually think that's a pro. The whole point of this is to enable minority ideas or minority skin color, if you want to even go by that, to win, right? So I think that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. Again, if they're like super crazy, they're not going to win because they're never going to get enough votes anyways, but fringe means not a majority. So, and then finally, any proportional system will only work if you're going for more than one seat. So if we do a district, if we do 6 districts, then proportional doesn't work. If we do 3 districts where you have 2 candidates per district, but you alternate every 2 years, in other words, every 2 years you're only voting for one of the 2 seats, proportional doesn't work. Because proportional is all about allowing you, your ballot to not be thrown away, that your ballot will go down the list depending on, and then so you will get that mix. If 2/3 of us like chocolate candy and 1/3 of us like, sweet hard candy, then we should be electing a council where 2/3 of them like chocolate candy and 1/3 of them like, sweet candy. So the scenario where proportional systems work is if we do proportional at large, which again, my opinion as a non-attorney, so you can throw this opinion out the window, is that a proportional system, whether it's by district or at large, does not disenfranchise minority candidates because you can stack your votes for minority candidates. So it would not be in violation of CVRA. So you could do proportional at large, or in our city, you could do proportional with 2 districts. So if you had 2 districts and you had 3 council members running per district, then you could do proportional and that could work as well. So those are my comments, and I know it was a lot to hear, but hopefully I was clear enough.
We'll go to Saskia and then Teresa and then Marcus.
I have a question. My question is, has Chula Vista and Modesto been challenged legally over there? Because you mentioned at large by seat, the 2 charter cities use the system, Santa Clara and Sunnyvale, and Chula Vista and Modesto used to use the system. Were they also?
I believe they were, yeah.
Okay. And do they have districts now?
They do.
Okay.
Go ahead and give it to Teresa. Actually, Jody, can you pass that, please? Thank you.
Is it on? Yeah. So I just wanted to, you actually said what I wanted to say, that really the reason that we're meeting is to set up a voting system that makes sure everybody is, enfranchised and everybody gets to say and do what works for them. And then we deal with the results of that. And we shouldn't lose sight of that's why we're here, not worrying about what the results are going to be. And then going back to what you had said, I actually think we should just put a motion to remove the parliamentarian style voting, because clearly it's great that you presented it, that we have the full overview of everything, but I don't think we should waste time. The 2 last.
It was the,
yeah.
Was it the choice voting? The proportional?
The ones that have never been used in the state of
Proportional,
California.
yeah.
And I really appreciate that, because I think having the full overview is really important to make good decisions. But I don't think that they apply to what we're doing. And I would like to make a motion right now to just eliminate them from the discussion, if that's appropriate.
Okay. Any discussion?
Absolutely. I'm completely against the idea of removing cumulative voting and single transferable voting.
I will.
I am completely against the idea of removing cumulative voting and single transferable voting. If the idea that we should remove this system is because, or is based on, first off, I'd like to really if you don't mind, if we can have this as a debate or like a kind of a conversation.
It's open for
Okay,
discussion.
Teresa, if you don't mind me asking, what was your reason behind wanting to remove them?
So they've never been used. We don't know that they're actually usable here in the state of California.
In what context? You mean to resolve a CVRA lawsuit, or in terms of what the registrar of voters
My
can handle?
understanding is that they've never been used in the state of California by any city, and that the time that they were judged not acceptable. Is that not correct?
Well, I think that was the, was that the Santa Clarita case?
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
because it's a general law city.
Okay.
So from a state constitutional standpoint,
It didn't
the
work
judge didn't
there.
have power to order
Okay.
that. But I think, to me, and perhaps maybe this is the best way to deal with it, it looks like our registrar of voters couldn't handle such an election. So maybe what we could do is wait until we find out whether it's even doable before we talk about
Okay, yeah.
further discussing it. You know, it's nice to discuss the merits of what it would be, but if you can't do it, if it's just not feasible for our registrar of voters to do, why don't we wait until after we hear from the registrar whether it's possible to do in our county? But it would be nice to be able to move to making some other decisions
So
rather
I
than
was
spend
just
a
gonna
lot of
s-
time on it.
Yeah, so I was going to say, if we can't debate any of these until we figure out what our registrar can do, then what's the point of trying to eliminate any of them at this point
Well,
until we figure out
we
what
know our
registrar
registrar can do districts. We know that because they do it in San Jose.
Yeah, but again, I mentioned this the last two meetings. I don't want to base my decision solely on what our registrar of voters can do today, because we may come up with a plan that says we are going to do, let's say we end up picking cumulative, or we end up picking single transferable, whatever, pick your favorite, right? And we can say our charter amendment, or the recommendation that we're going to make for our charter change is that we will do this, let's say, cumulative voting until the registrar of voters is able to support it, and we will go and work with the registrar of voters to enable that system. Even if we have to pay for it out of pocket, I know people don't like to hear that, but it's cheaper than a lawsuit. So I'm very much of an idealist. We have an opportunity right now to set this city on a path to enable better representation on our council, and I am more in favor of us picking an election system that enfranchises, not disenfranchises, but it empowers minority candidates to run for office, even if we technically aren't able to support that yet. But again, I'm an idealist, and we're setting our city up. We're not going to change our method of election in another 4 years. This is probably going to be set for the next, couple decades. So I want to pick what I think is best for the city, not what just our registrar can technically handle.
Okay.
So the whole point of let's eliminate something because our registrar can't handle it, I think it's our duty and our obligation to pick what's best for the city, and then let the city clerk's office go and handle that with the registrar, and let the city attorney's office go and handle the lawsuit. But as a committee, we have to do what's best for the city, not what's technically feasible in the next 6 months.
Okay.
Sorry, can you say?
I'm sorry. So we also have to come up with a proposal that can get passed by the electorate.
Sure.
And it'll be really hard to suggest they pass something that we don't know we can process. That would be where I am right now. I mean, maybe our timetable is off, because my understanding is we're hoping to have the new system in by the next elections, like go on the ballot in 2018 to be in use by 2020. So I love the idealism, and I think it's great, and I absolutely think we need to not be stuck where we are right now, but looking into what the future looks like. But it might be a staggered process.
I'm not
because of the
So
timeframes.
I'm gonna stop the conversation,
But,
because
no,
I
but there's
think
a motion on the floor, and I'm really
Hold
worried
on.
about that motion.
The reason I'm
so-
going to stop the reason I'm going to stop the conversation is because prior to the motion being made, I was supposed to get to Marcus, and I didn't get to Marcus, and so I'm going to just table to the side for a second the motion, and I want to let Marcus at least speak to what he wanted to speak to prior to us going to this, because
But we'll have an opportunity to get back to debating.
yes, we will. But I wanted to, yeah, well, we have a second, but when this came in, Marcus was next in the queue to speak, and he got bumped. And so I want to make sure he has an opportunity to speak, and then we'll get back to this debate on this motion.
I appreciate that, Tino. I just wanted to can I talk about my experience as a Hispanic candidate in the at-large system that we do have, where I ran against Tino Silva? I was a little shy of 4,000 votes compared to, I don't remember what Tino had.
It was 3%.
3%. So compared to that, and I don't think that had anything to do with me being Hispanic. It had everything to do with, my lack of experience, my lack of name recognition, and frankly, just maybe some people didn't like me. And I don't think, if I were to run again and lose again, I don't think that in Santa Clara it has anything to do with me being Hispanic.
Exactly.
And yeah, I've talked to a lot of Hispanics that don't vote who are eligible to. But even if they did, it was no guarantee that I was going to get their votes. And so I think that the way that we're thinking doesn't really apply to Santa Clara about Hispanics vote for Hispanics, whites votes for whites. Sorry, and because I've talked to Portuguese people and they were supporting me. And
What?
that was a secret.
Turn the camera off.
Take some
Where's Trump? I need somebody to investigate this election. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm just. You're just mad I put my sign at Las Flamas, right? That's why you're mad.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, I really don't. I mean, at least my experience, I didn't see that kind of happening in the race where people were voting for their own ethnicity, and I think we should keep that in mind too. That Santa Clara, we don't think about ethnicity. We think about what's best for the city, and that's how we vote. And so I think that's kind of what's special about Santa Clara as well, and keep that in mind. So
And thank you for saying that, because I think you articulated that better than I was in my conversation with Rex. My point is not that we should keep the council white or we shouldn't have diversity. My point was exactly your point. I felt you got votes because you were a millennial, you spoke well, you were simplistic, and people like that.
Yep.
And I envied it. Okay.
Thank you.
So, but it wasn't that I was running against Marcus because he's Hispanic and oh my gosh, how is he going to get that? Honest to God, never once came into my mind that I was running against someone who was Hispanic and someone who was Indian, and then there was the whole thing didn't cross my mind, because when we campaign, and you've campaigned, when you knock on doors, you talk to everybody. You don't just go to the white door or the whatever door. You talk to everybody. And everybody has an interest, and everybody has what they want, and so on and so forth. And so I'm glad you articulated it the way you did, because that's what I was getting at, which was, if you were, in the eyes of the voters, the best candidate, then you were the best candidate because of who you were.
Yep.
That's what I was trying to
that's understood too.
say.
That's why I wanted to kind of go back to that.
So Jody, we'll have one comment, and then we'll get back to our thing.
Yeah, I just want to say, actually, from what you just said, you don't, in an at-large system, you don't knock on every door. And you have to go to doors where you think you're going to get the vote first.
I didn't. I went.
Well,
I mean, how was I going to know
and
what
I won.
doors I was going to get a vote? Do I say, well, this door looks good, I'm going to get a vote from that door, and that door doesn't look as good?
I'll say it feels like you walk up to every door.
Well, you do a lot of walking, but there's no way. I mean, in mine election, which was a little bit different, but there's 60,000 people. You're not going to be able to talk to 60,000 people, so you have to strategize about that.
And do you strategize based on race and color, or do you strategize based on where you live and who you can influence? I mean, that's where this gets convoluted, is the whole race thing gets put in there, and it's not about that.
So I'm trying to go back to the election system and bring it back to what we're talking about, because I think that's very, very pertinent, that if you have an at-large method, you can't talk to everyone, and you have to do some strategizing, and you might not get to everyone that you want to get to, or people that maybe are your second or third tier, however you categorize it for yourself. And I'm not saying, oh, I only went to white women. Definitely not. But in an at-large system, you have to do some strategizing about whose door you're going to knock on, versus if you have a smaller area like a district, then you have a bigger, you're able to get to a higher percentage of the people that would vote for you.
I don't think, at least from my perspective, I wasn't arguing an at-large total, what we have, and a district. I agree with you with district from a representation and a lot of other, I agree with the districting piece of what you're saying 100%, because you can't It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Right.
And I tell you, with districts, Jody, you're still not going to get to everybody. Impossible. You won't.
Well, it
Unless
depends
you
on the
don't have a
size-
job.
depends on the size
and
of
you
your
walk
district.
8 hours a day, every day for 6 months. Because it's just when you look at how many districts we had in Santa Clara, at best, with everybody walking for you, maybe if you're lucky, you get to a quarter of them.
The precincts, you mean?
Yes,
I'm
so that's
sorry.
that's what I wanted to bring up. So in the at-large system, we're basing our walking off of precincts and who register voters, and on there it doesn't say whether a person's white, Hispanic, Indian, or anything. So
Actually, there are lists that have that.
oh well, I don't think ours. Mine didn't, and so that's how we based our walking. And you know, for our volunteers, we gave you walk this neighborhood, you walk this neighborhood. We had no idea whose door we were going up to. We just knew they were voters. You know. So.
I mean, that's just kind of first, I mean, I think we have a unique perspective because we just ran. And so part of when I think we hear some of the stuff that's being talked about, you kind of take your experience and say, wow, that's the farthest thing from the truth. That never, now, I know objectively, people are going to look at this decision objectively, and I totally get that, but I think it's important to bring a perspective into this conversation that says, yeah, that's great ideologically, but that's not the way it works. That's not, when people didn't vote, vote for him because he was Hispanic. Honestly, I thought they voted for him because he was a fresh voice and he made sense. So anyways, going back, let's go back to the debate. I want to give, where were we? I'm sorry, Hazel, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay, so I live in the North Side, and I'm actually Filipino. So I know that I think from the last 2010 report, I think Filipinos were second to Indians, Americans, or the Indian population. So again, living in the North Side and having someone on council is very refreshing, actually. I don't know how many people have actually been from the North Side. Just by voting population alone, we're much smaller than the South Side of Santa Clara, right? So, you know, again, just having the stadium, and I know that all of Santa Clara has unique issues to each neighborhood, and we were talking about this earlier, right? You have the old quad, you have Santa Clara University, you have the residents along near Santana Road, the Stevens Creek area, you have the people in Lawrence Station, right? You have the people around, like, yeah, the Lawrence Station and Apple, Monticello, Central Park, all those areas, right? And every neighborhood or every area in Santa Clara has their unique issues, right? And for me, I also don't vote by, I get the, I understand the whole ethnicity argument, right? But for me, I don't vote either by ethnicity. I vote by who's going to represent me, who's going to represent my voice, who's going to represent the city as a whole, right? Sorry. Yeah, it is. It is, absolutely. But I also have concerns about if it is by district, you know, getting qualified candidates because we have a smaller pool currently. Now, that may change once all the development, the high-density housing that's proposed and potentially approved. That will, if I did the math correctly, that will get us to the current numbers, maybe a little less than the existing populations in the 95050 and 95051 or zip codes, right? So, but again, for me, I vote, and I know other people vote based on what's best for Santa Clara. And we generally care about Santa Clara. We want people who are authentic, right? Who won't get people that are financially or politically driven. We want people who care about this city. That's all.
Saskia, you had something real quick, and then I'm going to bring us back to the motion, because we did divert, and we need to get through the motion whether we go forward or not. But go ahead, real quick. Or as long as you want.
Well, I had a question for Hazel, and that is, I do wonder though. I mean, there's nobody to represent me here. Let's face it. I mean, how many Australians run?
In Australia, a lot.
Yeah, I'm an American now, and that's where it comes down to, right? It comes back to that, right? So I'm passionate about that, the right to vote, right? And I'm actually very passionate about that. Everybody should vote. I think that's what distinguishes where I come from. Everybody votes, There is no excuse not to vote unless you're over a certain age. And even then, my 95-year-old mother voted last year, so you go figure, right? But I do think there is an element. I think you can't avoid the fact that some ethnicities will vote for, because that is their reasoning, not about the ethnicity, but they see that as where they can sink themselves and they can talk and they have that understanding. You know, I probably voted more for people that had some affinity to being a migrant, you know, if I think about it, right? So there is that, right? We can't avoid that, and then we just have to acknowledge that as well.
Thank you. Okay, actually, it was a great discussion. I know it got off topic a little bit, but I think there was some passion in the discussion, and I think that's what we're here for. It's not all going to be sugar-coated. So I want to move back to Teresa. I know I'm bad with names. Teresa, and so the question was basically going back to, do you want to keep your motion, or do you want to, it falls in your court.
Yeah, so right now, I would like to put the motion on that we eliminate those two last voting methods that have not been used in California. We don't know that we're going to be able to institute them, that our registrar of voters is going to be able to support them. And that's primarily based on what we've been commissioned to do, which is to come up with a system that is going to enfranchise as many people living in the city of Santa Clara as possible. And I don't think we can worry about people's motivations for voting. I think we need to worry about that they feel enfranchised, and then everything else will take care of itself. If my understanding is correct, 2 other commissions have looked at this issue and nothing has been done, and I feel it would be really nice if we could actually present something to the voters that's passable. And this may be ideal right now, but it might be premature. And just because in 10, 15, 20 years' time, things can change again, there's other methodologies that make sense right now. So that's where I'm coming from. That's why I have the motion on the table, and yeah, I don't know if
I'll get to you some. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this motion? Keith?
I'm not sure why you're suggesting those two. To me, there are 2 reasons. One is the registrar of voters might not be able to do it. That would be,
okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
well, I mean, I think people understand how voting works right now because they did it last year and 2 years before that. If we tweaked the way we voted, we're a valley full of smart people. People will learn and figure it out, and I don't want to pick our voting system because it appeals to the dumbest people, right? I want to pick a voting system that works for what I think are the smart people that live here. For the registrar of voters question, I mean, if we picked a voting system that could not be implemented, we couldn't use it. But of these 2, the registrar could do cumulative voting today. I mean, you have 5 candidates. You say, vote for one of these 5, vote for one of these 5, vote for one of these 5. You add up the bubbles, and you have implemented cumulative voting. As far as I understand, because it's not ranked. So I don't know why we'd eliminate cumulative voting because the registrar can't vote it, because the registrar could do that one today.
Okay.
I don't think the registrar can do single transferable vote. When we talked to them in 2000, they said, no, we can't do it. But the county supervisors told us in the next system we're probably supposed to have to do it.
So I was just notified that the register of voters will be here on June the 12th.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So my,
I think you're right. Yeah, the next meeting. So I just want to throw that out there for everybody because again,
you should table this then.
If you could then ask that question, the feasibility to the register of voters, then I think if we get a can't do it today, not going to do it by 2, then I think we have our answer. If they say, well, that's something we could look into, then I think we have the discussion, potentially.
And the other thing I would just like to point out too, I think that there is a sense of uncertainty around voting methodologies nationwide. And if we're going to do something, it shouldn't be some really new method that people are going to feel really uncomfortable with because it's never being done. I'm not sure that we're there right now. But we should table this issue then when the registrar comes, get further information. I'm totally okay with
So
that.
would you like to rescind your motion?
I am going to rescind my.
Okay, motion's rescinded.
Is that okay?
It absolutely is okay, but I still
Okay.
want to make my comment, if that's okay, Tino.
Quick.
Yes, it will be quick. So, I just want to make sure that even as you rescind it now and we discuss it later when the registrar comes, because this is really important. I don't want to just brush it under the rug because we don't know the answer to the registrar yet. Again, I'm talking based on principle and what I think is right for the city. When we talk about, and I totally agree with Keith, I think cumulative can be done today, right? And last year when we met, we heard that the registrar of voters was already going through the RFP process, so of renewing their system. So we'll get all those answers on June 12th when they come. So that's the bad part. The other part is when this whole discussion is still relevant to what Hazel was talking about like, for example, the north side, right? Where she doesn't want to necessarily, correct me if I'm misrepresenting what you're saying, that she's saying that districting might not always give her the best candidate for the north side, even though that person might be from the north side. But let's say Marcus really cares about the north side and will fight for them, but he lives in the old quad. And people on the north side know that Marcus is going to get their back. They may stack their votes for Marcus because it's an issue. Again, I know that our city attorney said that our system, we are not here to discuss systems that empower minority political opinions, but minority skin colors or ethnicities, right? But the point is, you can hit 2 birds with 1 stone. With any of these proportional systems, when you get it for skin color, you get it for the other thing. Maybe I misrepresented what you were saying, but so, okay, sorry. You may correct me. Go ahead, please. Please correct me. I don't mean to put words in anybody's mouth.
What I said was, we're here to look at a different voting methods that would eliminate impediments that we might see to minorities getting elected. That's number one. And then the other thing I said was, we're not here necessarily to get voting methods that promote majority political ideas. And I don't mean majority in the sense of majority ethnically. I just simply mean
ideologies.
Ideologies, yes.
No,
Regardless. So your characterization of what I said with regard to minorities in terms of ethnic minorities is just not.
Oh no,
not correct.
sorry. Yeah, okay, so then maybe I misspoke, but what you just said I agree with, right? So but what I'm saying is that we in picking a system that's a proportional system, you may get the benefit of both, where if somebody really cares about electing somebody of their same ethnicity, they can get that with that system. But if somebody doesn't care about that, let's say Hazel cares about, North Side issues, and, somebody else cares about Old Quad issues, and somebody else cares about Central, the West Side or Central Park issues, they may elect a candidate, regardless of where that candidate lives, that will prioritize their issues. And you may get that in addition. So all I'm trying to say, I'm being very verbose for something that is really simple, which is when you do a proportional system, not only do you get the benefits of proportional representation for ethnicity, but you may also get the benefits to killing 2 birds with 1 stone of getting proportional representation on ideologies. And I know Keith was trying to represent that in the beginning of the meeting, and maybe it was a little bit misunderstood.
Thank you. Jody.
So I know there's a lot of thought about the different voting methods, and to me I think that there's 2 questions. There's the election system and there's the voting method. And the voting method, it seems like we can't go too far on that until we've heard from the registrar to find out what's possible near term, long term. There's some issues with them that we need to hear from them. But I'm wondering if we can, without knowing the voting method, if we can decide on an election system, the by-district or the at-large, if it's possible for us to go down that path first now, in the little time we have left, and see if we can make either a decision or just start getting ourselves towards a direction on that one instead of going back and forth between the two. Because I think that they're two different issues, and maybe we can focus on one that we can make a decision on.
Well, so just from a chair perspective, item 4 was for us to discuss. So we were discussing the different types of methods, and that's why we've kind of gone a little bit back and forth. Item 5 is the district. So when we conclude 4, which I think we're getting very close to, because the register of voters is coming in, and that's when the majority of our questions are going to be answered, and then we can move on to 5, which is districting. So that's definitely next.
Okay, because we talked about both.
Well, you talked about districting a
Well,
little bit, and then
she went through the whole chart. The whole chart had both.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm
So-
trying to separate the two.
So what I'm saying is 4 was to talk about the voting methods, and that's what we've done. 5 will be to talk about districting, so I want to finish up 4, so we can get to 5, because I think at this point we're at where the register of voters is coming in next week, and I think the majority of our questions that we've had today will hopefully be answered by that individual, and I think that's how we got to where we are right now. Before, though, I want to give Steve 2 minutes to talk to item 4. He's asked if he could talk about item 4 real quick, the pros and cons. So I'll give Steve 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to 5. And if we want to stay later, then we can choose to stay later, or we can pick up districting as the first thing at the next meeting. But I would prefer that we talk about districting tonight, because I know when the register of voters comes in, we're probably going to want to talk about methods.
Pass, please.
Steve, you have 2 minutes, and I'm going to hold you to 2 minutes.
Okay, well, gee, I need to have a timer so I can see.
I got it.
I can't
Rod,
read
do you have
that
it?
from
Rod's
here,
got
Rod.
it. Go ahead and give it to him, Rod.
Let me get my stopwatch going, okay, so I can see.
There you go.
Okay, I can see this now. Perfect. Okay, I've got a handout, and the first 3 pages basically talk about the different kinds of systems which staff has given you a report on. But the basic principle behind proportional representation, majority rule with fair representation for the electoral minority in direct proportion to how people vote. Key ingredients is that voters choose from among lists of candidates, and in the single transferable vote system, every voter makes up their own list. The more votes that a list gets in common, then the more candidates from that list get elected. On the second page, you'll see the other electoral families. Cumulative voting and limited voting, which you didn't really discuss, was not on your chart, but limited voting can be definitely implemented with the equipment we have today. And that's a semi-proportional system similar to cumulative. The other systems are in what is lumped together as a majority plurality family. I'm not going to quibble whether IRV is majority or plurality. But you can do hybrid systems as well. That's on the third page. And for example, Hassam's example of 2 3-member districts using either cumulative or limited or proportional in each of those 3-member districts. They're districts, so it would satisfy the CVRA, letter of the CVRA, but it's proportional, so it would also guarantee representation. The last 2 pages. This is an example. Page 4 is a cumulative voting ballot that's used in Amarillo, Texas. I thought it helps for people to see exactly what these ballots look like. Page 5 are the instructions that are given to the voters. I find it hard to believe that you think your voters are dumber than the voters in Amarillo, Texas. But finally, and Rod's not going to like this, but even if the registrar could not, oh, by the way, we are going to look into implementing single transferable vote with the next equipment whenever that comes in. But Rod's not going to like this. You could do a hand-counted election with a concurrent election. Of course, Rod would have to have a bigger budget and hire more staff, and I know he would hate that. That's my 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
You. And for the record, I'm glad I don't live in Amarillo, because I have no idea what the hell this even means.
Read it.
All right. Let's move on to item number 5, and that is districting. So here's what I'm thinking, and it's up to you guys. I'm thinking we should try and go at least another 15 to 20 minutes after the meeting, so we can at least let the city attorney talk about the districts and give his presentation. But from what I've gathered from people, it sounds like we agree upon districting, we just needed to agree upon how many and what it might look like. No, but I'm just throwing it out there that people have talked about districts and that, you know, people have ideas about it, and there's a lot of ideas that are, you know, the benefits of districting and so on and so forth. So it isn't like we're going to start fresh. We've already been talking a little bit about it, so we should be able to get right into that discussion after the attorney gives his presentation. Does that make sense?
I'd like to make a motion for us to extend the meeting for, what did you want, 15 minutes?
How long is your presentation, Brian?
My presentation is going to be very short, actually.
So 15 minutes, okay.
I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting 15 minutes.
Second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thanks. Okay, and again, I have to save a little bit of time for public presentation too. Okay, Brian?
Okay, I really don't have all that much to say. I mean, I've repeated the same thing over and over again. Obviously, going to districts would make it much less likely for us to get sued again, regardless of the outcome of the election. I think you have several possibilities with district elections. You have, you could have just 6 districts and leave the mayor as an at-large election. You could have 2 districts, or you could have 3 districts with multi-members. So if you had 3 districts, you'd have 2 members in each district. Now, one thing you'd have to consider is if you wanted to start doing something like that, we would have to consider the fact that we have 3 council seats that are still only in their second term. So even if you created a district, you'd have to consider the fact that wherever those existing, we can't cut short an existing council term through a charter amendment. That's just, we just can't do that constitutionally. So if you want to start looking at those other options, if you did 6 districts, then wherever those existing council members were in those districts, they would just continue to run, they would continue to be seated in those districts. But yeah, so there's 3 that just got elected, right?
I mean, couldn't
that,
all of them land in the same district and so not be eligible?
They could. It's possible. This
Just saying is we need to think about it.
This committee would not be drawing districts. You would just be making the decision, do we go to district elections or not? There's a whole separate procedure for how you draw districts, and the CVRA has something to say about it when you do start drawing districts. So we're not going to get into where the districts are going to be or who's going to be in the districts, but you need to consider the fact that if you were to go to 2 districts or 3 districts rather than 6 districts, you would have to consider the fact that there would be existing council members in at least some of those districts. The other thing you would have to consider is what would the terms be? I assume you'd want to continue with 4-year terms for whichever council member got elected. The other thing I think, I was hoping we might get to the point of eliminating at least one system of voting, and that would be the district at-large election, which I find to be almost antithetical to any kind of help whatsoever in terms of California Voting Rights Act. So if one of you were to make a motion to eliminate that from further consideration, I'd be very happy, and we could continue without ever having to worry about it again.
You're talking where the council members run.
You would have to
from
be
a district, but everybody can vote for them.
Yes. At large. At large
I
from
would
district.
be willing to make that motion.
And I will gladly second that.
Go ahead.
Are you talking about at-large from district?
At-large
Or
from-
just at-large?
At-large from district.
What the school board does.
Yes, I was going to say, it's what the school board does.
I see no advantage to that whatsoever.
Steve?
I understand that it is, maybe it doesn't accomplish everything we want to do, but I just want everybody to keep in mind, if we eliminate this, what we're saying is if there's 4 districts or 6 districts, you get to elect one person to the council, not 6 people to the council like we do today. It's something to keep in mind. Right, just if you're only going to vote for your one district, you get your one person as opposed to the 6 people you're voting for, plus the mayor today.
So there's a motion on the floor to eliminate the district at large, I think.
No.
At large
Large
from
from
the-
district.
At large from district, not by district.
Is there any discussion?
It's a terrible system. We should get rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, not only is it disenfranchising voters, it's disenfranchising minorities more than our current seat system does. So it's really going backwards.
Okay. Is there any input from the public? I'll give you 1 minute. All right, we'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So 1 opposed, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 9 yes, 1 no. Hussam. Okay. Okay, so based on what I think the city attorney has said, and yes, I think we've heard it time and time again, let's open up the discussion on districts. Keith, go ahead.
I mean, I guess I just wrote a series of questions after the last 2 meetings for the city attorney. I don't need answers to these tonight. But my questions are, could we recommend a city charter amendment which changes our voting mechanism to be defined by ordinance and have the city council pass an ordinance to declare what our election system is? And I ask that because as I read the state law, the safe harbor only exists for voting mechanisms approved by ordinance.
The answer to that would be it doesn't really help given the timing.
Okay.
So the,
okay,
that would be the problem.
When you say it doesn't help, you mean it doesn't help us dealing with a lawsuit?
No, it doesn't help really accomplishing anything because you'd have to have the charter amendment just to give the council the authority to change the election system by ordinance. The other disadvantage with doing that, if you just kind of gave up on the charter being the controlling instrument of how you elect city council members, if you make it all you just simply say you just do this by ordinance, then the elected officials are creating their own election system, and that's just kind of inherently suspect. So it's not really a great way of going. It's better for the election system to be created by the charter, and then there's certain things that the city council can do, like have an ordinance, pass an ordinance about how you would district or something like that. But in terms of actually creating the system, it's a little bit clunkier way of going because you'd have a 2-step process. First, you'd have to amend the charter to allow them to do it. Then they would have to pass the ordinance, and I'm not sure that could all be done in time for the November election.
I mean, some of these questions came up just because I read the binder, and I mean, to me, we keep talking about the safe harbor if we go to districts, but my reasonable reading is that doesn't apply because we're a charter city, because we are not going to pass an ordinance to change our voting system to one of the approved ones, and if we don't pass an ordinance, there's no safe harbor. And so, I mean, I have questions all about that. I mean, if we do not pass an ordinance to do this, do we get state harbor, or are we relying on on a judge that this gets to accepting that, well, even though you didn't really pass an ordinance, I'm going to let you slide?
Well, I don't think a judge can tell us to amend our charter without a vote of the people. It just constitutionally, I just can't see how a judge can do that. So I think it's really the issue of a safe harbor has more to do with allowing a lawsuit to go forward without having to worry about attorney's fees. So what the what the state law did, the recent amendment did, was it allowed a city to say, okay, I'm a general law city, I'm getting sued under the Voting Rights Act, I'm going to just go to districts because I just don't want to keep this lawsuit alive. So it allows basically the city to make the lawsuit go away by passing an ordinance to go to districts. We can't do that. So the next question becomes, what happens to the lawsuit if we can't do that? If we say instead, let's say this group comes up with some kind of
Let's say we come up
charter.
with districts.
Let's say you come up with districts. You come up with a charter amendment for districts. That's equivalent to passing an ordinance. That's as much as the city can do, given its charter, towards going toward a district. I don't think a court would necessarily act on any kind of lawsuit until after it saw what happened in the June 2018 election. It's kind of like moot. Why are we arguing about all this when they're going to go to districts? Well, they might go to districts anyway. If the voters pass the charter amendment and say, yes, go to districts, then we're pretty much in the same boat as any city that just passed an ordinance going to districts. And so why would there be a lawsuit after that? So I think that's kind of how it works. I realize it's not a nice, neat answer as to is that a safe harbor, but I think it's the equivalent. I don't think we're going to get much action in the lawsuit if that's what we do.
As long as we are plausibly moving forward, and if, in your belief, if that moving forward is in a direction that would go to districts.
Right, and because the proof is in the pudding. Once you go to if you don't have the next election, either with districts or without districts, it's pretty hard to say you violated anything because it just hasn't happened yet. So I think, and as far as I know, I haven't heard of any city that has gone to districts that has nevertheless been sued under the California Voting Rights Act.
My next question would be, the safe harbor also uses singular for districts for the members. They don't seem to permit, general law cities can't have multi-member districts, as I understand. Do you believe that if we suggested multi-member districts, that would be sufficient to forestall the lawsuit and until June 2018, and then plausibly to forestall the lawsuit should the charter amendment pass?
It's hard for me to predict what a plaintiff would do. If we went to, certainly if we went to 3 2-member districts, to me that looks enough like districts. It doesn't say anywhere it has to be a single-member district. It really doesn't say. It really is. I really think what you should concentrate on is, with whatever it is you're looking at, keep your eye on the issue of what are the advantages and disadvantages of whatever you're going to recommend in terms of at least allowing for minority candidates to have better access to be elected. That's really what you're supposed to be doing in this exercise here. Districts looks like it would be, at least the state legislature has spoken in terms of what they think. And in terms of past voting rights violations in other places besides us, like if you look at the rest of the country where you do have pretty strong racial segregation in residential, where people live, that tends to create, however your voting system, it creates the potential for non-representation unless you have districts that are drawn to kind of give the opportunity for minorities to elect their own candidates. But as you've all stated, Santa Clara doesn't look very much like the rest of the country at all. And so none of this is really, none of this is really necessarily any kind of strict formula that I can give you. The legislature has spoken. They make it seem like they think at least going to districts should get you most of the way there towards avoiding California Voting Rights Act lawsuits. So if you think that's enough of an incentive to go to districts, then you can start talking about, well, does it make sense to have 3 3 districts, 2 districts, or 6 districts. Those were kind of your choices.
Okay.
And
on that, I think we've all said, I mean, there are rules for general law cities about how big city councils can be, right? Like they can't be more than 9 and they can't be less than 3.
yeah, I mean, you could
So-
increase the number of council seats. I mean, that's something you could do too.
But not above 9, correct?
For a charter city?
Yeah, okay.
Given what 13 looks like, I don't want you to go too high.
Okay.
But, no, I mean.
Is there
but
any requirement that districts not overlap? I mean, could we divide the city into 3 districts, north, west, and east, and then 2 years later, you divide the city
Well,
into
I mean.
northeast and northwest?
That would be.
I think you want your decision about districts to be focused on really, what makes sense in terms of the average voter and who you might vote for. If we had a pattern in our city of, well, all this ethnic group lives over on that side and this ethnic group's over on this side, then it becomes easy.
But we don't.
But we don't. So I can't really tell you the answer. But if you have, I can't think of any local jurisdiction that does it that way. And that's do we really want to make something so new that it's that complicated?
So let's kind of table the rest of that, because I think you got your answer, Keith.
Yeah, those were my questions.
Okay. We'll go to Hassam, and is there anybody else? Can I just take a straw poll? How many people are in favor of districting in some way, shape, or form? I'm just curious as to what people are thinking. This is not a vote. It's not. I just want to see where we're at. So, those that are in favor, at least they're thinking that districting or dividing it up either in 2, 3, or 6 is kind of where their mindset is. Show of hands. Okay. Okay. So.
So this is kind of related to my comment.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come to the conclusion that the districting is going to suffice the lawsuit. It's just a matter of how, and I think we're getting into how would we divide the city up, and that's really not for us to worry about. That's not going to be for us to decide how the city gets divided up. We're not going to be on that. That'll be done by someone else. So the question really becomes, are we in favor of districts? And I guess maybe the arguments we should have are, why are you in favor? And those that are in favor, why are you in favor? Those who are not, why are you not? So we can start this dialogue.
Okay. I want to make a comment, or 2 comments. One is kind of on Keith's last question, which I thought was a very clever way of saying, can we do 6 districts where all 6 districts cover the entire city? But anyways, you want an overlapping district, so you can make an overlapping district that covers the
so
whole
the answer
city.
to that's no. What's the
Yes.
second question?
The second one is, to answer the straw poll, I would oppose any district that would cause the number of council members in that district to be 2 or less. And I'll tell you why. I would oppose any districting that would bring the number of council members per district to 2 or less, to 2 or 1. I would oppose any district that had 2 or 1 council members in it. So how many do you want? So if in the scenario that we have 6 council members today, I would be in support of 2 districts with 3 council members each. Or I would support a districting scheme that increased the number of council members so that you had more than 2 council members per district.
Okay.
The reason is because when you go down to just 2 council members per district, you're talking about, unless you run them both on the same election cycle. You guys hear what I'm saying? Unless you run both seats open within that district on the same election cycle, then all you're doing is just doing a straight 2-run, a runoff system, and not instant, not the ranked choice or instant runoff. I'm talking about when you just do the primary in June and then you do the final in November, because you're just filling in 1 seat. Even if you have a district, let's say you have the North Side district, okay, and you have 2 seats for that district. Well, one seat is going to run on presidential elections, the other seat's going to run on gubernatorial elections, and every time you're just filling in one seat. So ultimately, you're just picking somebody who's getting 50%. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the best representation. It's better than what we have today, for sure, but it's still not going to be proportional for who's living in the north side. So now, if you ran both seats at the same time, the downside for that is that the north side will only vote for 2 council members, but only every 4 years.
But they're also assuming that they're going to have 2 from the north, because if you look at the population in the north, as Hazel said, it's not, our city is not 1/3 north
but districts,
and a third
but districts are divided by population. So, right.
The
So
north population is not
I know.
as
I'm just
large
saying,
as the
whatever district ends up covering the north side. So it'll maybe the north side plus maybe down to central. I don't know. Okay.
Right.
So, but my point still stands, which is unless you are voting for more than one to fill more than one seat in your district, you will never get good proportional representation.
Okay.
So I'm in favor of a districting scheme that allows you to fill more than one seat for your district in that same election. Does anybody not understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, we got it.
No, I'm asking the others. I know you got it.
I mean,
Tina. But does anybody
Makes sense.
not understand? You don't have to agree with it,
No.
but do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Can I,
Okay.
can I just ask a question? Because I see a difficulty with that idea. And the difficulty would be, we still have, we still elect half our council members every other year. I mean, every 4 years.
I was going to get to that as well.
So if
because-
you had a 3-member district, you're still going to have one, every 2 years, you're going to have, or every 4 years, you're going to have one seat open.
No. The way we elect council members right now, where in presidential we elect 4 council members, and then on gubernatorial we only elect 2, I think is wonky. We need to do 3 and 3. It's just, to me, put the mayor aside. You have 6 council seats. There's no reason why we should be doing 4 and then 2. It should just be 3 and 3. And if we intend to increase the number of council members to resolve that issue, then so be it. But it should be even. You get half this cycle, half that cycle. So if you have the scenario where you're doing two districts, right? And you have 3 council members per district, then you run all 3 in presidential, and then you run that district in presidential, you run that district in gubernatorial. And they're filling in 3 seats here and 3 seats there. So, I mean, or if you want to go to 3 districts and you want to increase the number of council members to 9, that's fine, or to 9, that's fine, and you do 2, 2, and 2, you know what I mean? Or 3, 3, and 3, whatever. So it's just whatever. So do others understand what I'm trying to get at? Which is, I'm trying to avoid the scenario where you're just voting for one person in your district at an election. No. I'm just putting mayor aside because we're not talking about mayor right now, right? You could do mayor by rank choice. You could just do it at large. Whatever you want to do for mayor, that's fine. Or you could do mayor like the way we do our Congress member today, which is.
But in essence, what you're saying is that if you run one candidate every 2 years, you're basically running one person, and so it's no different than what we do today.
It's a little bit different, but not.
But for the most part, it's really not. You're going to have the most popular person's going to win. There's no where you're going to rob
not
Peter to
getting
pay Paul and so on and so forth. And so that's in essence what I think Hassan's saying.
And that's a scenario where I would be against districting. Any other scenario, I'm okay with districting.
Anybody else? Any thoughts on where they're at? You're at, I should say. Yeah, Steve.
Just a quick comment. We mentioned that this committee should not get involved in what the districts look like, and I agree we shouldn't draw the line around Cabrillo and where the district is.
Yeah.
But I do think that if we're going to recommend districting to the city council, we should recommend the number of districts that we're going to have, because it goes back to my earlier point, because that directly affects the number of people you get to directly vote for to be on your council. So.
Right. Any other thoughts on, and again, we don't have to, this is just starting the dialogue, this is just kind of putting it out there.
Change the straw poll?
Marcus, yeah?
I just want to say that I would agree with Hossam and his idea, and I would really like to look more into maybe that type of districting. That one. And I'd be really interested in hearing more about that.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify. So if you were to make a proposal, I know you're not, you'd be actually wanting to propose adding council seats so that you could have same number elections each period, same number of seats going up each period. Is that what I heard? So instead of going for 3 seats in each district, it would be 4 in a 2-district?
No.
No.
All I'm saying is, there can be a scenario where you need to add you need to add council seats.
But not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So you can implement it right now with 6 seats, where you're not just filling in 1 seat per election, right? In your district, in your district.
It would be 2 and 1. In one.
It depends on how many districts you divide up. So obviously, if you do 6 districts, forget about it. You can only pick 1 at a time. If you do 2 districts, you have to fill 3 seats. So you can do it. And if you do 3 districts, you can do it 2 seats, but you'd have to run them in the same year, not split them up.
But at the end of the day, whether you have 3 seats or 2 seats, you're going to have to change something as far as
Absolutely.
because if you have 1 and 1, or you have 1 and 2, you're still going to have to make those so at some point, one of the candidate or whatever may only have a 2-year run and then have to run again, so they all run at the same time. So I don't think we can fix it right up front.
Are you talking about the transition period until we?
Yeah.
Yeah, the transition period is a transition period. I'm not talking about transition periods.
But what I'm saying is, though, that whether you have 2 or whether you have 3, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to, through the transition period, get it so they run together. So what I'm saying is, whether you said no less than 2, but yet if you ran the 2 together, then that's accomplishing the goal. If you ran 3 together, that accomplishes the goal. But there's a transition period that's going to take place where it's not going to happen right off the bat.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jody.
So I'm trying to understand, Hassam. So it sounds like you're saying you'd prefer districts that have at least 3, right? You didn't want 1 or 2. Because you want those 3 to get elected at the same time, so you have a better chance of getting some proportional representation. And, but then does that mean that like half the city would vote 1 year and the other half of the city would vote 2 years later?
In the scenario where you're talking about 6 council members and you're doing 2 districts with 3 each, yes.
So any particular person is only voting every 4 years?
The district.
For their district, sure.
Yeah.
Versus if you split it up so that, like if you had 2 people in the district and 1 was voted presidential and 1 was voted gubernatorial, then everyone in that district would get to vote every 2 years.
But
And
they're
what
only
you're saying is
filling 1
everyone
seat
would-
at a time.
I'm sorry?
But they would only be filling 1 seat at a time.
1 seat at a time.
Which is not good,
Right.
because you're just getting 50% vote and not the proportional system vote.
Well, not really 50%.
No, I'm just saying, like, so somebody would just be the popular person would win and not necessarily the minority people.
The problem that we're having. So you want people to be able to vote for more people in a seat at the same time, so that you get the chance of the minority being the second.
Yes.
Versus right now, all of our seats, which is effectively kind of like a district, but a seat, there's only 1 winner in a seat.
Yes.
And so the second choice person is always going to lose.
Yes.
You're trying to find a way to get, but you could have 2 winners, because then you'd have a first and a second.
Absolutely.
So it could be that you had 3 districts of 2, for instance.
You could.
You'd have to run them at the same time.
And run them at the same time. So everyone in that district would get to vote I'm just trying to articulate. So everyone would get to vote every 4 years, but on 2 people.
Yes.
So you'd have, okay.
Yes.
And then
Or 3 people.
Or on 3 people.
Right.
If you did it 2 districts.
And then you might have some areas of the city voting in one election and not in another election. And other people voting in that other election, but not in the first one.
And then there could be a scenario where you say, let's add 2 council members and we do 4 districts. Or let's add 2 council members and we do 3 districts and, let's add 3 council members and you do 3 districts with 3 people per district, right? So you could do it that way as well, and you could find a mix. So again, we can explore increasing the number of council members, but the objective is not the number of council members. The objective is to vote for more than 1 person at the same time, so that the number 2 person can win. And that's how you get the minority people in, because they're number 2.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap myself around that you're not, part of the city might be voting and part not. But I think that must be what San Jose does, right? Where half the seats are up every 2 years in San Jose?
Whenever you have districts, you're going to have it work that way unless they all vote every 4 years.
Okay.
So it doesn't really matter what number of districts you have. If
Yeah.
once you go to districts, you're only going to vote for your district once every 4 years.
Unless you have multi-member districts.
Unless you
that
have multi-member districts,
off-
yes.
That have off-year elections.
Right.
Because you could have a multi-member, but they all get voted on the same year.
So
Or you could have a
that's-
multi-member where you alternate.
Right, that's where he's talking about the transition period where we would bring those districts to where it's consistent, so we got it to where you would vote every 4 years in
No,
that
but you could
district.
do it either, you could transition to either way. You could transition it so that you had 2-member districts and both get voted on the same time, which is what Hossam is advocating
Right.
for. Or you could set it up so that you have a 2-member district and you get to vote every 2 years on alternating.
But see, but he's saying that if
No,
you
but
do
then you would
that,
only be
Yeah,
voting
then
I'm
you're
I'm
only...
not saying that's better or
No, no, no.
worse. I'm just trying to understand what the different options are.
Right, so if we were to do it, if we had 2 people right now, you might have one who still has a term, you might have one that's coming up, an open seat in 2018. So what Hassam's saying is in 2018 you vote for this one person, but it's only one person, it's only one seat. Then in 2020, that person's up, like for instance, like
Right, that's a
say Kathy
transition.
would be
That
up,
would work out
so
the transition.
her seat would be up, but the person we voted for in 2018 has 2 more years, so in essence, you're voting for one person at one time, right?
Don't
Is that what
worry
you're
about
saying?
transitions, because in transitions, what you do is whoever it gets the lowest number of votes out of the 3 in the district or the 2 in the district will get the short end of the stick.
No,
They
but-
get a
Right? But
2-year
that's
term.
but that's okay. Yeah, they'll only get a 2-year term. So don't worry about transitions, because transitions can be handled where the least popular one still gets only the short end of the stick, but then by the next cycle, it's all evened out and everybody gets 4 years. So I'm not worried too much about transition times. We'll deal with transition, but if we agree on the principle.
Just like when Sunnyvale went from odd year elections to even year elections, they just decided everyone would have an extra year on their term. You could do
Yeah,
things.
we
So
can
You can do things
they can-
to get to where you need to get to.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to end with Saskia, and then we're going to go to public presentation, and then we're going to end real fast. So go ahead.
So I have a throw a curveball. And it's probably one for the attorney. Could we have districts where it's determined that the candidate has to live in that district, so that there's a thought that they then represent that district, right? Okay, yes. But what if everybody in the city got to vote for that person? Does that?
That's the one you
Oh,
just
no,
eliminated.
we don't do that now.
That
That's
was
the one you
motion
just
that we
eliminated.
Oh, that's the one we threw out. Oh, is that? See, I can. Well, I
Curveball
wish.
handled.
Well, no, but you know what? That wasn't explained well then. I'm sorry if that was not explained well, because that's something I think could actually work well in a small. We are not a huge city. I think. Okay, and I think that's the problem we have here. You all seem to think that, oh, we're such a big city and we're not San Jose. And sure, we're growing, but we're not San Jose. And we're not San Francisco. You know, I think we're still a small city, and we forget that, and we still are a city that what affects me over where I live, which isn't anywhere where the stadium is, does affect me, and it affects me greatly, and I'll tell you why. Because when I want to go to work over at Fremont on a stadium day, I don't go that way. So that's an issue that I may say, well, I don't live in the north side, so it doesn't affect me. It does affect me. All right. So and I can give you many other examples, not just the stadium. And we like to choose the stadium because it's the biggest elephant in the room, but there are many others. So I'm a little perturbed now that we can't. I'm sorry. Had I known that, I'm sorry, Steve, you didn't explain that well. And I can tell you honestly, when Steve has an opinion, I'm more likely to hear what Steve has to say. I respect what Steve has to say, and I'll give you another reason why I respect what Steve has to say is because he's worked this city greater than any of us. He may have lived here a long time, but he's worked this city, so he knows what affects that north side and what affects over me where I live, which is near Santa Clara High School, and those that affect the things in downtown, and if I don't get a say in what's going on in downtown, I'm going to feel like there's a problem again. And it's another issue. I personally, I know you're all affected by this lawsuit. My thoughts are, screw it. Sue us. See what happens. We're a different city. And we need to remember that and remember where we come from and who we're representing. And I'm sure Steve can talk to that, and probably Keith even more. Because these guys have been around the city a lot longer, and even Jody with her school district experience. We are a small city. I'm not happy that we threw that out. I want to put that in there.
I was going to say, I totally agree with you. I understood it differently when it came up. I thought, when we said from district, it was opposite. I was thinking opposite. So I was actually at large by district. I think both of them should still be on the table.
May I?
Sure.
I totally agree with what you're saying, Saskia, and that's why I do prefer at large and no districting at all. Okay, but the reason, and maybe the city attorney can jump in here if what I'm saying is correct. I think that kind of a system, it actually makes it worse from the lawsuit standpoint. And I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you. So
You could walk past my house and trip and sue me. I have, I have insurance. I have people. I have good things. I think you guys are scared of a lawsuit for the wrong reasons. You can't be scared. You cannot live in fear of a lawsuit. Anything in Santa Clara, anywhere you go in this California, is all governed by lawsuits. Seriously, buy a house. That's what I do on every day. There is so much that is affected by lawsuits. You cannot be driven by that and that alone.
and it's that very attitude that I like to apply to just at large completely.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't.
Seriously, you can have all these wonderful people that have these wonderful thoughts about how we should vote. I agree on that. Maybe our voting system stinks. I personally agree on that one. But I don't agree on the fact that we can't have an opinion about the north side, because that's what you're now saying. Sorry, you can't have an opinion on the north side. You live there. I had a lot of opinions on when it came to the stadium. Nobody heard me on those, and now you're all saying, what did we do?
And so if we're going to, my perspective, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody here but myself, which is, my perspective is, if we're going to take that approach, then I say we go full steam ahead on that and not do a half, okay, I'm going to watch my language, we're not going to do a half job on saying we're going to do districting, but anybody can vote. Like, you have to be from that district, but anybody. Then if we're just going to take that attitude and say, let's do what's right for the city and deal with any lawsuit that comes to us, let's just do at large, right? And then not at large, but like you can do some cumulative or whatever at large, right?
It's ridiculous. I think we should be talking.
By district at large, meant the entire city could vote for you, but you had to live in one particular place to get voted for. What we have right now is seat numbers. You pick a seat number and then everyone gets to vote for you. Saying the person, in addition to having picked a seat number, having to live in a particular district is worse than picking your seat numbers, because good people don't necessarily know to spread themselves across the city so that they can get, good people can spread themselves across the seats if the two best candidates for city council live across the street from each other. If you have a, excuse me? Well, but if you have a from district at large system, that can't happen, because they both live in the same district, but you can't vote for both of them.
His point is still valid if you have two seats in the district and you have three great city, yeah. So his point is still valid.
I understood, I'm fine with eliminating the requirement that someone live in a particular district if we're going to vote for them at large. If the entire city gets to vote for you, you should get to live anywhere in the city.
That's
Is-
that's what we have now.
That's what we have now, which is why I was okay with not further considering a system that's even worse than what we have now, which is everyone would get to vote for you, but you'd have to live one particular place to run this.
You know,
shit.
I can, for me, from we're going over a little time, and that's the way it goes. But if you're a candidate from a district, it's no different than being in a seat. If the whole city can vote for you, I mean, what's the point in having a district? I mean, basically, so I'm in District 1, but I still have to campaign to the entire city. Well, because the school district does that.
Well, no, and that's not the reason, but what you find is then you get representation from around the city. So we have somebody who represents the north side. So you don't get just people who live geographically in the same area, you get people who are spread out amongst the city. So that's about the only advantage that I see to an at-large from district, because I'm not crazy about it either. But it does get us spread out amongst the entire district.
But the interesting thing is that that's a misnomer, because you automatically assume that, well, I'm going to represent the north side, but my votes don't have to all come from the north side. So it's like, well, he lives in the north side, therefore he's in this district, therefore he's responsible for this district, but my votes are coming from the entire city. So I could say, hey, I live in District 1, but I'm going to campaign like hell in District 3 and 2, and I'm going to get all those votes, and we make the assumption that anybody in my district, I'm going to have to respond to them. The truth is I don't have to, because I'm going for citywide. So whether I live in District 1, 2, or 3, when you're at large, it doesn't matter, because you're still at large. I mean, if I got the majority of the votes in the north side, I live in the south side, me or anybody else, and that person wins, when they sit in that seat, they're going to say to themselves, okay, yeah, I live in this district, this thing called District 1, but man, I won the election because of District 2 and District 3. So we make the assumption that because I live there, that I'm automatically going to represent that little district. But the truth of the matter is, my votes come from everywhere, so I'm not really married. Now, if all of my votes came from that district, as a politician, I'm going to say, I'm going to pay attention to that district. But if all my votes came from the second district or third, honestly, as a politician, that's who I'm going to pay attention to, because that's the group that's going to get me reelected, and that's what being a politician is. How do I get reelected? So if I'm just saying the way it is. If the majority of my votes come from 3, you think I'm going to say, hey, thanks, guys, but I'm going to take care of District 1. Somebody else lives in your district that you didn't vote for. Hell no. I'm going to say, hey, what can I do for you? You elected me. You elected me.
So I'd like to say something here.
Sorry.
So I think we're losing sight of the fact that we're actually convened to enfranchise people and to give minority communities an opportunity to see that they have representation as they grow their communities and stuff. And we can't worry about how they poll or how they're going to manage campaigns and things. Our agenda right now is to say, how do we create the best voting system for the needs right now going forward for the foreseeable future? And it's been I don't think that we're all focused on the lawsuit. I mean, that's not really, it doesn't really take up any of my mental energy. When I think about going forward, what takes up my mental energy is I have a fiduciary responsibility to the voters of the city and to the city of Santa Clara to set us up so that we have the best electoral process going forward. And the question is that districts? What kind of districts? And how many seats should be in each district?
Right, but yeah, hold on a second. But we were talking about the at-large
voting, yeah. But we already took care of that.
Well, but we didn't, because we came full circle, and there were some people that were a little disappointed because they didn't understand what it meant, and so that's why we started to have that discussion about what it really means, and that's how we got on this tangent.
Okay, so is the vote going to stand, or do we?
Well,
need
as of
to-
now, it stands because there's no motion or anything else, and we don't have time to do anything about it tonight, guys.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to make a motion, I believe you can make a motion.
Is your mic on?
Go ahead, Keith, just go, because we gotta.
People online won't be able to hear.
I'd just like to make a motion to re-add consideration and further discussion of from district at-large elections for the next meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Opposed? 1, so 9-1. Okay, and so we will again have that discussion. I want to remind you, though, that next meeting, the county voter register of voters is going to be here. So I don't know how long that's going to take. But this was a great discussion. I know we got off on tangents and so on and so forth, but you know, the only way we can really get to something we all believe in is if we all put what we believe on the table, and we're not going to agree with everybody. And that's just the way this is. And we shouldn't agree with everybody. We should have different opinions. And then hopefully we will eventually get down, you know, to agreeing upon what makes sense. So thank you for being candid. I want to have public presentation. There's 2 folks that want to have public that would like to speak. So Steve, we'll have you come up first.
Thank you. I wanted to introduce the concept of election thresholds, because some people have mentioned it, but it's a really important concept to understand. When you're filling one seat, whether it's a numbered seat or a single-member district, the threshold of election is a minimum number of votes you need to get to guarantee that you will win. So the threshold of election when you're electing one person is 50% plus 1 vote. Because if you get more than 50%, no matter how many other candidates there are, no matter how big people vote for those other candidates, you're still going to win. Now, obviously, if it's a plurality election and there's 5 candidates running, you might win with a lot less than 50% of the vote. But that's the threshold, is if you get 50%, more than 50%, you're guaranteed to win. In an at-large election, say you're filling 3 seats, if it's everybody gets 3 votes and the most votes wins, the threshold actually goes up. And when you're filling 3 seats, the threshold of election to guarantee that you win is 75%. But when you're using a proportional or semi-proportional system, such as cumulative voting, limited voting, or at-large, that was 1 minute, not 2. So you said 1 minute?
2? Yeah.
Thank you. Then the threshold goes down. So with limited or cumulative or proportional, when you're filling 3 seats in the system that Mr. Haggag was saying, the threshold goes down to 25%. You just need more than 25%. So that's how your political or ethnic minorities can get represented. And I know Keith was concentrating on political minorities, political points of view, political diversity. But it also holds for ethnic diversity if that's how people choose to vote. The nice thing about proportional systems is you're not imposing on people their ideology based on geography. With the single-member districts, you're determining your geography, where you live, supposedly determines your ideology, and that's just not true, because you might have more in common with somebody who lives across town than with your next-door neighbor. So that's my 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, Ben, I had some comments on some of the things I heard today. Someone, I believe over here, had mentioned the benefit of having districts for smaller districts, smaller the campaign in. I just want to say proportional actually does reduce the amount of votes you need significantly. If you have a 6-member district, 60,000 people, you're only trying to get 9,000 votes, even though you can pull them from anywhere in the city. And so that does significantly change how campaigning works, just like doing small districts does. And that's important to recognize. Districts are actually really good for geographic representations. People here mentioned it. If you want to represent Northside, you can make a Northside district. I was kind of worried, you guys were like, we're not going to worry about districts. If you are looking for geographic representation, it's important to say, well, we want a Northside seat or a quad seat. And if that's what you value, it's okay to think about that. That's important. It's a lot what you get. They're kind of bad for most everything else. the thing about districts is you can draw the lines to get anything you want. So, if you want, ethnic minority representation, you can draw lines usually to get that. And that's why they're great to solve problems in other parts of the country where they really do have really huge ethnic problems with particularly geographical located. It's really I really feel scummy every time you're like, oh, you can draw lines to solve this problem. It's like, oh, that's kind of messy. Proportional really isn't that hard to understand. Everyone says it's so hard. It's like, well, it's done in a lot of places, and it's done in a lot of schools, and it's just you're electing multiple people from one area. It's mathematically shown to be better, and there's lots of really good white papers out there that show this. And it's this whole fear of the law and trying to get into the white books. I said, don't fear it. I can really respect this. People say, oh, we have technical limitations, we can't do it. I can really respect if, we want geographical limitations to do it. I can't respect, we don't want to be first. We're in Santa Clara, we're in Silicon Valley, be first. And I can't respect, we think this is better, but because of the way the law is written, it's a problem. Like, if it's going to be better and it's going to get better minority representation, do it. And let it all shake out. And if you can stand behind why it's going to be better for the city, I really, this whole just playing it safe, I don't think fits Santa Clara's ethics and ego at all.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. Can I get a motion to end the meeting?
One quick question for the city attorney. I read somewhere that the lawsuit has a hearing date of July 28th.
Yes.
Is there anything you need from us before that date?
I would love if we could have a recommendation before that date. I mean, I'm totally in favor of the group having as much discussion as they'd like, but there's a limitation on the amount of time we can devote to this. And I think I would really urge you to try to focus your decision, to go down a path and start making decisions so that we're not just having, these wide-ranging discussions of different things, because we really do have to come to a recommendation. I would hope by the end of July, certainly.
Okay.
So the chair will recall at the last commission, that's the problem we ran into, is we ran out of time.
Yep.
So if we have 3 or 4 meeting dates, then we probably have to back up to a council date so that they can hear our recommendation and maybe even have time for them to study or schedule a study session. So we might only have 2 meetings left to make this decision.
That concerns me a lot because we went through this last year, and you can see the passion that everybody has, which is great. It's getting through that passion down to something that we can all agree upon, and that process takes time. I may need to ask this group if they're willing to meet on a weekly basis as we get down to the wire. If we feel collectively that it would be in our best interest to meet weekly, and we don't need to determine that tonight or have a discussion tonight, but just keep in the back of your mind that that is an option, that we could choose to meet if we feel like we're going to get to that deadline and we're not going to get to where we need to be, then that's a discussion we need to have.
Clarification from our city attorney. So, I mean, obviously, if we've gone so far as making a recommendation to council and council passing a motion before the court date, that's probably the best case scenario. But if we go so far as just the committee making a recommendation, but the council hasn't yet made their final decision, is that also acceptable?
Yeah, I think that would be the goal, is for the committee to make a recommendation.
Okay.
And all it is, and all the court date is it's called a case management conference. It's not some hard thing, but it would be very nice to know what the charter amendment, if any, that's being recommended would be by that time. And frankly, that should be enough time for you to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what's going on here is people expressing their political philosophies about how things should go and not go, but we really need to keep focused on the task, which is what amendments, if any, to our charter should we make to eliminate some of these impediments. We have to face the reality of we have not a white majority city with an all-white council. I mean, there's just no two ways of getting around it. That's the reality of what we have. And so, regardless of the fact that we all know that it's probably not the case that it's because, you know, this ethnicity votes for that ethnicity or whatever, or they vote for their own ethnicity, or people don't live all in one place or whatever. It's still going to be a very hard lawsuit to deal with because of that ultimate fact. And so I think we have to do something. And so I really would urge you to try to focus as much as you can on simply starting to make certain decisions and narrowing your focus, because I see, while all your opinions are very valid, we have to start coming to a consensus as to where we're going to go.
I agree.
We just don't have an infinite amount of time to deal with this, and it's not necessary. I mean, you can do, I know this group can do that, and it's just going to take some, you know, working together to keep that focus going.
So the goal is to not add any meetings, because I know we already have meetings on top of meetings. So I don't want to add any. I, as the chair, will stick more to moving to get things done, and as the city attorney said, so I hope you'll indulge me in trying to do that, because that might seem a little, not, I don't want to come across as abrupt or whatever the case is, but we are going to have to start making some decisions, making some hard decisions, and so I may be trying my best to move that along. And I know sometimes when you do that, some people can get offended, well, yeah, I didn't, you know, but I do have to start moving it to where we start getting a recommendation, because we just can't afford to not have a recommendation by that point in time. So I will do my best to move it forward, and hopefully you'll appreciate what I'm trying to do. It's not personal. It's just we have to figure out how we can get this recommendation by the end of July. Okay.
I'll second Keith's motion to adjourn.
All in favor?